Alrighty, on this video, what we're going to do is start working on actually knowing which item is currently playing and how far along it is. So we're going to start this off in our server modules playlist.js. And we already have data, or we already have fields available to us to keep track of all this stuff. So we have our next source ID, our current index, current source, and current time. Actually, ignore next source ID. We don't need that for anything. What I'm also going to do is I'm also going to set some intervals here at the top. So basically what's going to go on is every second we are going to update the current time of the current playlist item, and then every 5 seconds we're going to notify all of the people that are currently logged in of where we currently are in the video. So we're going to do our synchronization that way. We can make that 5 seconds, we can make that 10 seconds if we wanted to decrease server load, or we can make it shorter, or however we want. I find 5 seconds works out very well to notify everyone to keep them in sync for demonstration purposes, so we don't have to wait too long for the server to tell the clients where they are in the video. So we're going to set interval on this underscore tick update time bind this 1 second. And then we're also going to do a set interval on this tick update clients bind this 5 seconds. Now the bind is important. If you don't pass in the bind, it's not going to execute these functions in the right on the right context. Now we're not going to implement these methods yet. Actually, we are going to implement a couple other methods before that, and then we'll implement these two ticks. So the first thing we want to do is let's go ahead and write a helper function. Let's write that after init. After init money, we'll write a helper function called getSourceById ID. And this is going to simply return lodash.find on the on this playlist, and then we're going to pass in an object with the ID. So this will find the source given an ID. Now we could also make this a little faster by writing an object that indexes each item by ID as well. I'm not worrying about that. We come up here and we also have to import Lodash, of course. So import underscore from Lodash. I'm not too concerned about the performance here. There are different data structures we could use to make the performance of locating an item by ID a little bit better. But for this particular example, it's not a big deal. And a potential suggestion for improvement would be to find or to try to use maybe a different data structure to represent our playlist. But that's not the most important thing right now. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and set our current source. So how does set current source work? Well, it's going to take in a source as a parameter, and then I'm going to say if source equals null, then this current source equals null, and this current index equals this current time equals 0. If the source is not null, then I'm going to say const new index equals this playlist index of source if new index equals -1. So again, we're doing another linear search here. This would be another place where you could potentially improve performance by using a different data structure, but I'm not too concerned about this sort of performance with only a couple, potentially maybe even just a couple hundred items in our playlist still wouldn't impact that much. But anyway, we're going to throw a new error. Cannot set current to source ID / source.title. It was not found. Okay, then we'll set this current time equals 0, this current source equals source, and this current index equals new index. Then I'm going to say this underscore io.emit playlist : current this dot underscore create current event. Now create current event is another method we're going to be writing at lower in this class a little bit later. But create current event is simply going to create the event that's going to notify, or create the JavaScript object that's going to notify all the clients of the current new source. So then I'm going to go ahead and say console log, whoops, come on, you can do it. Setting current, or how about playlist : setting current to source ? Source title or nothing if no source is specified. All right, the next function I'm going to make, the next public method, is going to be play next source. Play next source is going to say, if not this playlist dot length, then this set current source to null, and then return. So if we don't have any items in our playlist, there's nothing next to play in the first place. So go ahead and set our current source to null, notify everybody that we no longer are playing anything. Then I'm going to say, if this current index plus 1 is greater or equal to this playlist.length, then this dot set current source to this playlist at 0. So if we're at the last item of the playlist, set the current item to the first item. Otherwise, this dot set current source to this underscore playlist at this underscore current index plus 1. So otherwise, move to the next item. And that's it. So those are, so we have our get source by ID, which just finds a source based off ID using Lodash. We have our set current source, and we have our play next source. So very straightforward methods. So now we've done that, let's go ahead and implement our tick update time and tick update client methods. I'm going to do this at the bottom. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. I'm going to do that before register client, though. I'm going to say tick update time is going to say if this current source is null, then if this playlist length, this set current source to this playlist 0. So every second, if the current source is null, if we're not playing anything, but while we're not playing anything, we have items in our playlist, then set the current item to the first item in the playlist. Otherwise, this current time plus plus, increment the counter, and then say if this current time is greater than this current source dot total time plus 2, then this dot play next source. So what this does is, if we do have a current item, go ahead and increment our time. And I know set interval isn't a very high resolution timer, so things will drift, but it won't drift by a significant amount, and in practice, it's hardly noticeable. Then we check to see if the current time is greater than the current source total time plus 2. So if it's 2 seconds after the video played, go ahead and play the next item. This two-second thing is arbitrary, but it's possible that other clients are delayed by maybe 2 seconds, or there's a 2-second lag between the clients and the server, however we're doing that. If that's true, then just go ahead and just, or rather, wait until that source is done, and 2 seconds, until we move to the next source. That was a terribly convoluted sentence, and I apologize. Okay, let's go ahead and do our tick update clients. Tick update clients, which runs every 5 seconds, is going to do nothing more than this .io emit playlist current this create current event. And then finally, we can implement our create current event, which is simply create current event is going to return this .current source. So are we playing something? If we are, return an object. Otherwise, return an object that has an ID of null and a time of 0. But if we are null, let's format this a little bit differently to make it maybe a little bit clearer to read. There we go. So if we have a current source, then set, well, maybe format that. There we go. I like that more. Set the ID to this current source.id and the time to this current time. So, there we go. Every 5 seconds, each player will be notified of the current item and the current time. But what if the playlist just got what if the client just got initialized? So he gets the list of the playlist, but now he needs to know what the current time is, and he doesn't want to wait 5 seconds to get the next update. Well, we're going to go ahead and create an action. So after our client action playlist list, I'm going to create a playlist current. Remember to use arrow functions here. And playlist current will simply return this create current event. So at any time, a client can request, hey, what's the current item? What time are we at? We can invoke this method and get that response. So yeah, that is about it for the server side. So let's go ahead and work on the client side. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is jump into our stores playlist.js. I'm going to go ahead and change this code up a little bit. So we'll emit out our playlist list, but once we receive the list for the first time after our connect, I also want to emit a playlist list current. So what I'm going to do here is instead of saying emit, I'm going to say emit action money, and then I'm going to say subscribe, and then once we're done getting the playlist list, I'm going to say server emit playlist current. So I'm kind of saying, go ahead and get the list, and then after you get the list, get the currently playing item. Okay, let's go ahead and keep track, or get our, or extract our current item. So I'm going to come up here to the top. After our server on playlist added, I'm going to say server on playlist current map op current. And that's going to fold in the currently playing item into our state. So implementing playlist on current. Let's go ahead and jump down here to the bottom. Or how about after op add? I'm going to say function op current, and op current receives an ID and a time. And he's going to say return state goes into, and then this function. I'm going to say const source equals state map ID. If not source, return op error, state cannot find item with ID. Now, this might be due to being not synchronized with the playlist. So again, if you receive an op error, you might want to go out and tell the playlist store to refresh its playlist. Then I'm going to say, if not state current or state current source does not equal source, then state current equals object, and the object is simply going to say source is source, time is time, and progress equals calculate progress times source. And we'll write the calculate progress here momentarily. Otherwise, I'm going to say state.current.time equals time, and state current progress equals calculate progress. The reason I'm doing this is to avoid creating a new object every time we get this in. This is just a simple way where I only create a new current object if the current item changed. Otherwise, if it's just a timing update, I simply mutate those values directly. And again, you wouldn't do it this way if you're working with an immutable state. But if you're working with an immutable state, I would recommend moving the concept of tracking the current progress of the current item into a state that is not related to our playlist, so to avoid deep copying the playlist items. Alternatively, if you use something like immutable.js, that might not be the case because it won't recopy the list array if it changed. But again, that's just an architectural thing that you guys can look into if you want to. Anyway, so we'll say return type is current state to state. All right, let's go ahead and write our calculate progress. That's really simple to write. So I'm going to scroll down here to the bottom after op error. I'm going to say function calculate progress, and this will take in a time and a source. And he's simply going to return math.min time divided by source total time 1 times 100. So basically, this is just saying, divide the time by the total time, and then make sure it's at it's at most 1. And then multiply that by 100. So we'll get a number between, obviously between 0 and 100. We might want to math floor this, actually. Math floor this whole operation. And that way we won't have a decimal point and decimal digits. And the reason we need that, or that's important, is because we are going to be passing this into the CSS width property of our progress bar. And I don't want to deal with browser inconsistencies with dealing with percentage widths with decimals in them. That actually might not be the case anymore, but it sure used to a couple years ago. Anyway, stuff and things. That's our calculate progress, so take a look at that if you want to take a look at that. Let's scroll up here. This is our op current, and then scroll up here again. All we did here was we added the playlist current event handler, and we emitted a playlist current after we receive the playlist for the first time once we connect. But anyway, now we can get the currently playing item, as well as update time. So let's go ahead and jump over to our list and see how we can use that. What I am going to do, I think, actually, is make this a little bit simpler and make a sort of helper observable here. And what it's going to be is the current item. So I'm going to say this current item money equals this dot state, or how about this dot actions money dot, let's see. Actually, I don't want to say current item. I want to say server time money equals this actions filter A goes into A type equals current, and then map A goes into A state current dot publish replay of 1, and then I want to connect that. This server time dot connect. So now we can just subscribe to the server time every time a new server time event is published, saying we need to resynchronize our player. We can just subscribe to this one observable, and we don't have to worry about doing other filtering. All right, let's hop on over to our components playlist list, and let's deal with that. I'm going to take this separator here, and I'm going to paste it down here, because we're going to have a different set of code for dealing with the current item. So I'm just going to say current item, and then I'm going to say let last item equals null, and I'm going to say this playlist dot server time map, or whoops, we don't want to map. Let's just comp subscribe to this, and then we're going to get the current item out of that. So we'll say current goes into, and of course this is going to process or get procced every time, or get called every time a current item changes or the server resyncs our time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if last item does not equal current dot, I believe source. Let's go ahead and verify that. Actually, I'm going to change that up just a little bit. But I want to verify the properties on this. So our current is a source and a time and a progress, and that is indeed what's being published from our server time property. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, let's see how we want to do this. I'm going to say if current equals null, so there's now nothing playing. If last item does not equal null, then we're going to say last item dot, let's see here. Last item dot, and then we'll simply say is playing equals false, last item equals null. Actually, we can do that within that conditional. Quite a bit of indentation here that I'm not a big fan of. Then return. So if current is null, then we check to see if we were currently playing an item. Otherwise, we set is playing to false, and we set it to null. Now, last item is going to be a reference to our playlist items component, and in a moment here, we'll add the is playing property to it. Anyway, so that's if is current is null. Next up, I'm going to say if current does not equal, whoops. Oh, yes. I want to say const current comp equals items map on current.source.id. And for this, we can add some error handling, I suppose, into this. I can say if current comp equals null. That's not how you spell null. Well, it is with that just incorrect capitalization. I'm going to say console error cannot find component for current source ID / current source title, and then return. And then I'm going to say if last item, which I'm going to change the name of last item, I'm going to change that to last comp. If last comp does not equal current comp, then if last comp does not equal null, then last comp dot is playing equals false, and then last comp equals current comp, and current comp dot is playing is true. I also want to scroll the playlist window into the view of the last component of the component that's playing when we switch over items. Because imagine you have like 800 videos in your playlist. You want the current item to be scrolled into view when it changes for everybody to be able to keep track of that. And we can do that with a simple animation. I'm going to say const scroll top is going to be equal to the, let's see here. This is going to look a little strange, but we're going to say equals current comp element offset top minus this element offset top plus this element scroll top, minus current comp dot element dot height times 2. And then we're going to say this mount animate the scroll top to scroll top, which we don't need to specify that twice. So here we calculate. Remember how on our list, so we have the scroll area, which is the parent of the UL. So the scroll area is actually what's responsible for making the scroll bar appear. The UL is not. So we have to go through a little bit of more calculation to deal with exactly how to get that item to scroll into view, and that's going to be dependent on the offset of our current list and the scroll top of our current list, as well as the height, or sorry, as well as the offset top of the element. We also add this term in, the minus current comp element height times 2. And what that'll do is it'll make sure that there are 2 elements in the playlist still visible after doing the scrolling. So it'll kind of scroll to a particular, I guess, offset where there'll be 2 items visible. And the final thing that we're going to do here, all the way at the bottom, outside of the if last comp does not equal current comp, we're going to say current comp dot progress equals current dot progress. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up the rest of the CSS and implement our scroll, our progress bar and all that fun stuff in the next video. So we'll see you guys then.